I can't confirm as yet because I haven't had an opportunity to sit with Corey as yet. That information is supposed to come to me either today or tomorrow, so I can't confirm as yet. Okay. In the interim, what will happen is that the current acting director of cricket will act as convener of selectors. He will work with the team director together with the captain in selecting their squad as well as the team or the final 11 that will be playing on a particular day. So that's in the interim until we then, and I say we as in the director of cricket himself, fills those roles. Good question, Sim. So the reason why we ended up going this direction, or essentially what motivated the board, together with the senior management of Cricket South Africa, to go this route, is that we had to work as a senior management on a new strategy for the organization in terms of where do we see Cricket South Africa going in the future. As you know, we've had Project 654 that we've had to deal with, the restructuring of domestic cricket. And part of our strategy session spoke about mostly about the national team as far as cricket is concerned and what we wanted to achieve through the national team. Part of that being bringing the national team closer to the organization so that we are indeed seen as one organization, having better communication lines with the national team. And then one other thing that we identified was the style of play. So we wanted to influence or to at least adopt a certain style of play as far as the national team is concerned, which to us as management was not really clear, if I may put it that way. And then we also wanted to change the culture for various reasons, whether it be administrative, communication, brand management point of view. So we wanted to change the culture in the team. So that's not necessarily saying that the current culture that the team has been operating under, which is the Protea Fire, is being done away with. So that's the team culture. But we want to have an organizational culture which will essentially embody this Protea Fire culture as well, where the team will be expected to act and behave in a certain manner when representing Cricket South Africa. So that was part of the reasons why we wanted to go this route. And for us to then be able to essentially adopt the strategy, accountability was the key factor that we spoke about. And at that, we spoke about the clear line of sight. So in saying that, we then obviously took most of the responsibilities that lie on or used to lie with the board. And those responsibilities were now passed on to the CEO, which is myself, and then I was obviously encouraged by the board to do the same as well, to empower the management staff that will be reporting to me with this necessary power-making decisions so that I, in turn, can be able to hold them to account. So the board used to appoint the coach, which is the team director in this new structure. That will no longer happen. The director of cricket will do that. The board used to appoint the convener of selectors together with the selection team. The director of cricket will do that. And the board used to appoint the team manager, so the administrative manager of the team will be appointed by the director of cricket. So essentially you can imagine, the amount of work that had to go into the presentations that we've had to give to the board over the past 2 weeks, and for the board to finally agree to the presentation that management put on the table, and to essentially agree to letting go of all this power and give it to management. And that's just to be able to hold management to account should we get to a point where the board is not as satisfied as they currently are with the performances of the team. Okay, obviously we've done the domestic cricket review over the past couple of years, and during those times, our president, even at the awards, I think it's 2 years ago, mooted that there would be changes as far as structure is concerned. When we were negotiating MOU 18 with SACA, the Players Union, and we proposed that we have a relook at the domestic structure. SACA also advised that we would need to look at what we currently term the semi-provincial cricket, because it was that top tier was a burdensome structure as far as the finances of Cricket South Africa is concerned. And at that, if you look at the performances of that tier, they were not satisfactory. So essentially, it's a structure that is costing us money, but not necessarily yielding the results that we want to see from a professional cricket point of view. Number three is that obviously because of us having targets, so to speak, players tend to be called up to represent either their franchise teams when there is injuries or shortfalls at the top, and similarly, players get called from franchise to the Proteas. So more often than not, we found ourselves transgressing against the rules of ICC when it comes to players moving up and down, as far as these structures are concerned. And now at every CEC at ICC, I had to explain why this happened, why we shouldn't be suspended for these points, to not dock these points, to not penalize us there, because these are the reasons. So it was causing too much administrative problems for us. So the best thing to do was to remove this one tier of first-class cricket and bump up the first level, so to speak. Obviously, what that does is that it creates more job opportunities for coaches, more opportunities for players to turn professional. When we do a rough calculation in our heads, as Cricket South Africa, there would be about 70 players who obviously lose their contracts. But honestly speaking, we feel it's the right way to go as Cricket South Africa. You really have to be a poor performer as a player to find yourself in that 70, if you think about it. Because there will be literally over 140, I think, players who get an opportunity to turn professional from semi-professional. So for you to find yourself in that bottom 70, your results will have to speak to that tune. So we think we're giving everybody a fair opportunity now to put your hand up in saying, to a province that's been given an opportunity to turn professional, you can pick me. To a province that will be losing players, you can pick me. So there's plenty of opportunities for people to improve their performances so they don't lose their contracts. So yes, there has been a bit of a disconnect between the organization and the players, but the players are not to blame. It's the organization in itself. Too much of the human resource capabilities that the company should have been performing on behalf of the players were outsourced to SACA. So naturally what that does is that it drives the players towards those who are looking after them or to be seen looking after them. So obviously with us looking at restructuring everything, this is one other aspect we looked at to say, how do we now start slowly taking back the responsibilities that the organization was, in essence, was supposed to execute on behalf of players and bring the players closer so that they understand as and when changes are done within the organization, what is informing those changes. Communication lines between the organization and the players is clearer and much simpler. Decision making is quicker. So that's what's essentially informed the structure. There is now a one-stop shop. As I've just said, there's no reason now for me as a CEO, when Corey comes to me and say, listen, I'd like to do this, and say, wait for me to go to board level. We've now been empowered to take decisions. So essentially the buck stops with him unless he feels that it's a decision that he'd like to include me on, and then we can deliberate between the two of us. But essentially now, this is where the buck stops. There's no need to keep going to the board and waiting for weeks or months for the board to convene, for communication to then go back to players. Now decisions can be made almost instantaneously.
Sorry, the new structural changes, how?
So we have engaged with a couple of senior players, but this is now on a one-on-one basis. One would like to think, at some point pretty soon we'll be able to engage with the rest of the team so that we can communicate with them and hear their views and, especially essentially explain our thinking to them. As far as professional players are concerned, unfortunately, we haven't had that opportunity to do so purely because SACA refused to give that opportunity to us and indicated that if there is a message to be portrayed to the professional players, Tony Irish will be the man to do so. So that is something that we're trying to work on to make sure that whatever message is that we try to give to the players is delivered as intended, and that Tony Irish represents Cricket South Africa in its truest form. So we understand that, yes, there are a few differences between us, but we're trying to solve those differences in a very professional manner.
So,
No, there's no breakdown. We continue to talk with Tony Irish. Our president, in fact, had an informal chat with him in London to discuss these matters. Our treasurer of the board had an informal chat with him over the weekend to discuss these matters. And in fact, they have, SACA has agreed to a meeting with Cricket South Africa to iron out these matters. What Cricket South Africa needs to do now is to send an invite to SACA with dates in terms of when that meeting can happen, for SACA to agree to a particular date and a venue where we can meet and essentially decide how we move forward. But SACA continues to be a key part of Cricket South Africa.
Hloni?
From
Okay, as far as the last question is concerned, in terms of financial savings is concerned, that is obviously from a budgetary point of view, because these are projected losses that we're speaking about, and therefore will include a lot of assumptions. So those assumptions obviously include player cost, it includes logistics and so forth. So until we can get to sit with SAC and agree on the granular detail, unfortunately those remain just that, budget assumptions. So even the 654 is worked on a lot of assumptions as we speak. So it's not a factual loss that we're going to experience as Cricket South Africa. But what we're saying is that we'd rather communicate that this is what we're seeing, and we want to work together with the entire system in making sure that we actually do not realize such losses, whether they become lesser or more than that. The idea here is to make sure that we don't get to that point. Okay, as far as the restructuring of domestic cricket is concerned, all the pointers that were put on the table when it comes to the restructure thereof are pointers that SACA had agreed to. What they haven't agreed to from a consultation point of view was the level of detail that was given to them by Cricket South Africa. And from Cricket South Africa's point of view, we have explained why we've given them the detail that we have and not as much detail as they would wanted to see. They're still not happy with the level of detail, yes, but as far as the restructure is concerned, that's something that they had endorsed. So that policy has always been there. It wasn't something new. What's happened was that we haven't managed to reach our transformational targets in the past, so we didn't reach them again, in the previous year. And obviously, with us not being able to reach the targets that we set for ourselves, it concerned the board. And then obviously we'd have to now go back as senior management and some board members to go to the minister to explain why this hasn't happened, to see the EPG panel and explain why we find ourselves in a picture that we would be at the time. And given that the board was concerned, the board then spoke about maybe activating this policy, which was in place already. A couple of names were mooted in the meeting in terms of who should have the sign-off. So it's not the final say. It's to have a sign-off on the final 11 that goes onto the field with the view of looking at the targets that have been set that needs to be achieved at the end of the year. So essentially the thinking is that the selector will have his own team that he wishes to select. How that team looks demographically, it's not my problem as a CEO. I would sign off that team irrespective of how it looks. But I would sign it off based on the fact that I would have communicated with him that you need to understand that if you look down the road, this is now what you need to do to get to that final mark. So essentially what happens is that if I sign off every team and then at the end of the season we haven't reached those targets, the board then holds me accountable. My job is just to continue to remind the convener that if you've selected a team that looks like this, this is what it means. If the next match comes and you select a team that looks like this, the target has changed. This is now what it means for you going forward. So essentially, that's what it meant. It didn't mean that the CEO would be selecting. So as things stand, the board has decided to put that policy on ice. So no, we will not be actioning it unless the board then says, from an EPG point of view, we want to now activate it because, as most of you or some of you might know, we are now being asked to project for the next 10 years. And as you can imagine, it's a very difficult job to do, given that cricket does not have the right to have substitutes that are counted, so to speak.
Stuart, you'll be
Sure.
next.
So I basically went to the board. I first spoke with Otis, and I said to Otis, I would like to suggest that the board have a look at your contract, and with a possible extension. And excuse me. And then Otis responded by saying that he would more or less look at being employed until probably 2021, and that's what I should suggest to the board rather. I did suggest that to the board. The board deliberated on that, and part of the board agreeing, or what the board essentially said to me, let me rather quote what was said to me verbatim was, we are agreeing that you can go ahead as CEO and extend the coach's contract subject to him agreeing to key specific pointers in his contract changing. Part of that being EPG, part of that being communication, part of that being performance. We went back to the coach together with the now acting director of cricket and communicated such to the coach, of which he said he could not immediately agree until he saw what his contract looked like. Now, that meeting is essentially the same meeting where this policy was of selection was spoken of. And obviously, it is well documented now in the media that the coach was not really happy about the board rather wanting to now activate this policy. And in fact, this policy was in place for 3 days. So it's not later on in the year. It's literally 3 days. The 1st of February meeting, I think, was on a Friday evening. And on a Monday evening, the president called me and said, listen, Thabang, I've had a chat with a few guys as far as the team's concerned, and we're thinking of putting this policy on ice. Would you mind if we did that? And I said, no, there's absolutely no reason why I would mind in the board putting this policy on ice, because the perception that was already put out there was that the board, together with the CEO, is intending on interfering on selection, which wasn't true. So to dispel such notions or rumors, we just simply put the policy on ice. So similarly, with Otis not agreeing, that's one of the decisions, again, that emanated from that meeting that caused the board to then say, listen, because the coach is not agreeable to a few things that you're already saying, let's rather put his contract on ice as well and judge him the same way that we said we would from the first on, which is on his performances at the World Cup. Okay. As far as the decisions that were taken on the structure, as well as bringing us into best practices with professional sport, essentially what that does is that it allows me as the CEO to focus on the operations of the company like I need to. It allows the director of cricket to now focus on the national team and our cricket structures like he needs to have the say that he needs to have in that respective department, being the cricket services department, like he should. What it also does is that it empowers the director of cricket to sit with the team director, a la coach, and say, here's your team, you do with it as you please, and I will hold you accountable. So the director of cricket will essentially let the team director know what is it that he's looking for. The team director, in terms of what ingredients he puts in place to essentially present that stew, is up to him. So it allows everybody to have that sort of accountability, and that's what I mean by professional sports. Similarly, Corey didn't really explain the structure in detail. So part of what we've said is that now going forward, the guys who are in the medical setup of the team should have the right to speak up if they feel a player is not fit to play. Should have the right to say to a selector, no, this player you cannot pick because they're not ready as far as their scheduled workload and recovery from injury is concerned. So the chief medical officer will also be in charge of player workload management and the administration thereof, and he will have the necessary powers to dictate when players should rest. It's been very difficult in the past to give a young guy like KG some rest, but nobody has been essentially accountable to say when he should rest. So now there is somebody who's going to be held accountable. We cannot complain about poor team performances and blame fatigue injuries and so forth, when there's somebody who's directly in charge of making sure that such instances do not influence team performance. Similarly, in selection, the convener will be held accountable in terms of his planning and how he executes his planning. And ultimately, the person answerable to all the people that they're answerable to is the director of cricket. So there's no longer that need for the director of cricket, as I said, to come to the CEO unless he feels compelled to. But accountability now lies with all individuals in terms of their respective roles.
Yeah, cool.
As far as deadlines are concerned, we're trying to make sure that before the English tour starts, we do have the permanent employees in place. But as you might know, that this is a different environment, so to speak. So depending on who the director of cricket is talking to in terms of filling these specific roles, there might need to be some negotiations in place, and that might delay the deadline that he set for himself. So the interim structure will remain until he can essentially have, a permanent structure in place. Because, as I said, I mean, if he approaches you, Stuart, and says, "I'd like you to act in, or to essentially act in this role," and you demand more than what Cricket South Africa can afford, he has to go back, relook at his budgets. If it's putting him out of budget, but he's essentially sees you as an integral part of his strategy, he will obviously have to now come to me and say, "Listen, I really want Stuart, but this is how much he's costing me. I need you now to dip into your budget to make sure that I get Stuart." And, that on its own will take some delay. So you can imagine if Stuart comes on board and he wants his own team and his team is the same, the delays that it can cost. So we've set a deadline, but we might not meet it. Sure. I think as far as performances are concerned, it is there. It's well documented that our betting has sort of deteriorated, and it raised a concern with us, and that is something that we're looking to improve. I think in the past we've been a well-balanced team. We haven't really been, whether you could say, batting heavy or bowling heavy. We've always been well balanced as the Proteas, but in the past 2 years, betting seemed to have literally taken a back seat, and that is something that we want to change. Now, as far as the style of play is concerned, what we want to see is a more positive style of play. We want to see, obviously, the team taking calculated risks, but essentially backing themselves in their thinking and their decision making at that, and that is what we're hoping that the director of cricket will essentially influence together with the team director. So it helps from an accountability point of view, in a sense that if you telling the team director that this is the sort of style of play we want to see, he can take whatever he wants and from a resource point of view and essentially drive us to that direction. From a culture point of view, we haven't been really happy as management of Cricket South Africa, because we didn't feel that we were as close as we should have been. First of all, I said this earlier, to the team, and we didn't feel the team was as close as it should be as well, to the organization. And there are obviously certain instances that I'm not at liberty to talk to in a public space in terms of what we wanted to influence in that team space. I would like to have an opportunity, myself and the director of cricket, to essentially have a sit down with the team to talk about the things that we want to see improve in their space, and they too can have their say in terms of what they think we need to improve as management of Cricket South Africa as far as their space is concerned. So it needs to be obviously a two-way conversation that needs to take place before we can essentially air our dirty laundry in public.
Ken? Then Tinos.
Thanks for your questions, Ken. I think if you talk about, and the experience that an individual has as far as playing first-class cricket is concerned, I don't really see it as that much important given what we want to achieve. What we after here is the brains of an individual. So, we have appointed some coaches with the required experience, if I may put it that way, in the past. None of them have won us the World Cup before. You have world-class coaches who have won the World Cup as players, well decorated, whether they have the Ballon d'Or or whatnot in football. But when it comes to coaching professional soccer or football, they're really nowhere to be found. And then you have an individual like Jose Mourinho, who's achieved so much, but is nowhere near what other coaches who have good professional playing experience is concerned. So we're not really after your playing stats here. We're after what you can put on the table when it comes to strategy, how you can execute that strategy, and obviously your managerial skills. And I don't think as a player you get to be given that playing first-class cricket. So for this year, the league will continue being on SABC. We will, in probably the next few days, if not a week or two, communicate such plans in terms of how we tend to roll out the league. And as far as restructuring of broadcast deals or commercial deals is concerned, it's pretty difficult to say yes or no to that question now. And reason being that the landscape that we operate in, as far as the South African economy is concerned, we tend to sometimes forget that we're not in a similar environment as Australia finds itself in terms of the amount of money that the public broadcaster pumps into sport with the help of the government. We're not on similar landscape as what the English find themselves in terms of the amount of broadcasters that are in their country who want to have sport on their respective channels. We're not in a similar space as India, where on average pay TV costs $2 a month, and there's that many broadcasters there as well who are all interested in this key content being cricket. We only have literally 2 broadcasters in the country who can afford to broadcast cricket, and that's SABC and SuperSport. So you can imagine that CSA does not really have much of a room to maneuver in terms of making decisions. So I think as things stand, we are lucky to find ourselves where we are, in a sense that we can broadcast international cricket both on free-to-air as well as pay TV. Obviously, because none of them have exclusivity, we do not receive the same values as we would had we given any of them exclusivity. But that's the pain we have to take for wanting to spread the game.
Heinz?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think it would be irresponsible for me to say no. We're willing to go to court at all costs. If we have to, we will, to defend our views as Cricket South Africa. But yes, it is our hope that we don't go to court. I mean, at the end of the day, we are family with SAC, and I'd like to think that whatever differences might be on the table, as family, we should be able to sit around the table and thresh out those differences and essentially agree to move on, whether the one party might still be, unhappy to a certain extent or not. That should be irrelevant. What's important here is to make sure that, we represent cricket as well as we should, because if this matter does go to court, irrespective of who wins the court case, cricket's still the loser. The money that we actually saying we want to save, we're going to be giving to lawyers here. What can you say besides that he's a legend? He's a living legend, and he's going to be sorely missed as far as the test arena is concerned, but has taken a pretty wise and bold decision at that in trying to prolong his career at international level. We fully support him as management of Cricket South Africa. Obviously, one can say that the news to me came as a surprise. I thought maybe he might want to wait a little bit longer, play the test series against England, where essentially he started his career against from an opposition point of view. But he had talks with our acting director of cricket, and he felt now is the time, and he had his own plans in terms of how he wants to prolong his career. He was supported by the director of cricket and is now therefore supported by the entire organization. So he will be sorely missed, but we will still see him in other formats, and we hope that we can preserve him as much as we've managed to preserve Imran Tahir. So if he can last until 40 and still bowl at 140 an hour, I'll be more than happy.